The rain continued. It was hard rain, a perpetual rain, a sweating and steaming rain. It was a mizzle, a downpour, a fountain, a whipping at the eyes, an undertow at the ankles. It was a rain to drown all rains and the memory of rains. It came by the pound, by the ton, hacked at the jungle and cut the trees like scissors, shaved the grass and tunneled the soil, molted the bushes, shrank men's hands into the hands of winkled apes. It rained, a solid glassy rain, and it never stopped. "How much further, Lieutenant?" "I don't know. A mile? 10 miles? 1,000? Aren't you sure?" "How can I be sure?" "I don't like this. I don't like this rain. If we only knew how far it was till the SunDome, I'd feel better." "Another hour or two from here." "You really think so, Lieutenant?" "Of course." "Are you lying to keep us happy, Lieutenant?" "I'm lying to keep you happy, you're right. Shut up." The two men sat together in the rain. Behind them sat two other men who were wet and tired and slumped like clay that was melting. The lieutenant looked up. He had a face that had once been brown, and now the rain had washed it pale. The rain had washed the color from his eyes, and they were white. There were his teeth. As he walked with his hair, that was white. Even his uniform was beginning to turn white, perhaps a little green with fungus. "Don't be crazy. It never stops raining on Venus. It just goes and goes and goes. I've lived here for 10 years. I've never seen a minute or a second where it wasn't just pouring. It's like living underwater." The lieutenant rose up, shrugging his guns into place. "Well, we better get going. We'll find that SunDome yet. Or we won't find it. In an hour or so." "Now you're lying to me, Lieutenant." "No. Now I'm lying to myself. This is one of those times when you've got to lie. I can't take much more of this." They walked down the jungle trail, now and then looking at their compasses. There was no direction anywhere, only what the compass said. There was a gray sky and rain falling, and jungle and path, and far back behind from themselves, a rocket in which they had ridden and fallen, a rocket in which they lay two of their friends dead, dripping with rain. And they walked in single file, not speaking. They came to a river, which lay wide and flat and brown, flowing down the great single sea. The surface of it was stippled with a billion places by the rain. "All right, Simmons." The lieutenant nodded. Simmons took a small packet from his bag, which with the pressure was hidden chemical, inflated to a large boat. The lieutenant directed the cutting of wood and the quick making of paddles, and they set out into the river, paddling swiftly across the smooth surface in the rain. The lieutenant felt the cold rain on his cheeks, and on his neck, and on his moving arms. The cold was beginning to seep into his lungs. He felt the rain on his ears, on his eyes, on his legs. "I don't sleep at night." "Who could? Who has? When? How many nights have we slept?" 30 nights, 30 days. Who can sleep with rain slamming on their heads, banging away? I'd give anything for a hat, anything at all, so it wouldn't hit my head anymore. I get headaches, you know. My head's sore, it hurts all the time. We're not made for water. You can't sleep, you can't breathe right, you're crazy from sogginess. If we'd been ready for a crash, we'd have brought a waterproof uniform and hats. If this beating rain on your head gets you, most of all, it's so heavy, it's like BB shots. I don't know how long I can take it. They crossed the river, and crossing, they thought of the SunDome, somewhere ahead of them, shining in the jungle rain. A yellow house round and bright as the sun. A house 15 feet high by 100 feet in diameter, in which was warmth, quiet, hot food, freedom from rain. In the center of the SunDome, of course, was a sun. A small floating free globe of yellow fire, drifting in space at the top of the building where you could look at it from where you sat, smoking or reading a book. There it would be, the yellow sun, just the size of the Earth's sun, and it was warm and continuous, and the rain world of Venus would be forgotten as long as they stayed in that house and idled their time. The lieutenant turned and looked back at the three men using their oars and gritting their teeth. They were as white as mushrooms, as white as a lie was. Venus bleached everything away in a few months. Even the jungle was an immense cartoon nightmare. For how could the jungle be green? No sun, with always rain, and always dusk. A white jungle with pale cheese-colored leaves, and the earth carved of wet camembert. And the tree boles with immense toadstools, everything black and white. And how often could you see the soil itself? Wasn't it mostly a creek, a stream, a puddle, a pool, a lake, a river, and then what? At last a sea? Here we are. They leaped out of the farthest shore, splashing and sending up showers. The boat was deflated, stored in the cigarette pack. Then, standing on the rainy shore, they tried to light up a few smokes for themselves. It was 5 minutes or so before shuddering. They worked the inverted lighter, cupping their hands, managed a few drags upon a cigarette, that all too quickly were limp and beaten away from their lips by a sudden slap of rain. And they walked on. Just a moment. I thought I saw something ahead. The SunDome? I'm not sure. The rain closed in again. Simmons began to run. The SunDome! Come back, Simmons! Simmons vanished in the rain. The others ran after him. They found him in a little clearing and then stopped and looked at him. The rocket ship. It was lying where they had left it. Somehow, they had circled back from where they had started. In the ruin of the ship, green fungus was growing up out of the mouths of the two dead men. And as they watched, the fungus took flower. The petals broke away in the rain, and the fungus died. An electrical storm must be nearby. We threw our compasses off. That explains it. You're right. What do we do now? Start out again. Good Lord. We're not any closer to anywhere. Let's try to keep calm about it, Simmons. Calm? The rain's driving me wild. We've enough food for another 2 days if we're careful. The rain danced on their skin, on their wet uniform. The rain streamed from their noses and ears, from their fingers and knees. They looked like stone fountains frozen in the jungle, issuing forth water from every pore. And as they stood from a distance, they heard a roar. And then the monster came out of the rain. The monster was supported upon 1,000 electric blue legs. It walked swiftly and terribly. It struck down a leg with a driving blow. Everywhere a leg stuck, a tree fell and burned. Great whiffs of ozone filled the rainy air. Smoke blew away and was broken by the rain. The monster was a half-mile wide and a mile high. It fell off the ground like a great blind thing. Sometimes, for a moment, it had no legs at all. Then in an instant, 1,000 whips would fall out upon its belly, white-blue whips to sting the jungle. Here's the electrical storm. There's the thing that ruined our compasses. And it's coming this way. Lie down. You may get through unhurt. Lie down about 50 feet from the rocket. It may very well spend its force there and leave us. Get down. The men flopped. Is it coming? Coming. Is it nearer? Is it nearer? It's nearer. Here she is. The monster came and stood over them. It dropped down 10 blue bolts of lightning which struck the rocket. The rocket flashed like a beaten gong and gave off a metal ringing. The monster let down 15 more bolts which danced about in ridiculous pantomime, the feeling of the jungle and watery soil. Story pulled from. The lightning struck the rocket another dozen times. The lieutenant turned his head on his arms and saw the blue blazing flashes. He saw free spit and crumple into ruin. He saw the monstrous dark cloud turn like a black disc overhead and hurl down 100 other poles of electricity. The man who had leaped up was now running like someone a great hail of pillars. He ran and dodged between the pillars, and then at last a dozen of the pillars slammed down. It was the sound of fly wings when landing upon a grill wire of an exterminator. The lieutenant remembered this from his childhood on the farm. There was a smell of a man burned to a cinder. The lieutenant lowered his head. "Don't look up," he told the others. He was afraid that he too might run at any moment. The storm above them flashed down another series of bolts and then moved on away. Once again there was only the rain, which rapidly cleared the air of the charged smell, and in a moment the three remaining men were sitting, waiting for the beat of their hearts to subside into quiet once more. They walked over to the body, thinking that perhaps they could still save the man's life. They couldn't believe there wasn't some way to help the man. It was the natural act of men who had not accepted death until they had touched it, turned it over, made plans to bury it or leave it there for the jungle to bury in an hour of quick growth. The body was twisted steel, wrapped in burned leather. It looked like a wax dummy that had been flown into an incinerator and pulled out after. Wax sunk to the charcoal skeleton. Only the teeth were white, and they shone like a strange white bracelet dropped half through the clenched black fist. "He shouldn't have jumped up." They said it almost at the same time, all of them, even as they stood over the body to begin to vanish, for the vegetation was edging in upon it. Little vines, ivy, creepers, and even flowers for the dead. At a distance, the storm walked off, a blue bolt of lightning was gone. They crossed a river and a creek and a stream and a dozen other rivers and creeks and streams. Before their eyes, rivers appeared, rushing new rivers, while old rivers changed their courses. Rivers the color of mercury, rivers the color of silver and milk. The single sea. There was only one continent on Venus. This land was 3,000 miles long by 1,000 miles wide. About this island was the single sea, which covered the entire planet. The single sea, which lay upon the pallid shore with little motion. "This way." The lieutenant nodded south. "I'm sure there are 2 SunDomes down that way." While they were at it, why didn't they build 100 more? There's 120 of them now, aren't there? 126 as of last month. They tried to push a bill through Congress back on Earth a year ago to provide for a couple dozen more, but you know how that is. They'd rather few men went crazy with the rain, spend a little more. They started south. The lieutenant and Simmons and the third man Pickard walked in the rain that fell heavily and lightly, in the rain that poured and hammered and did not stop falling upon the land and the sea and the walking people. Simmons saw it first. "There it is!" "There's what?" "The SunDome!" The lieutenant blinked the water from his eyes, raised his hand to ward off the stinging blows of the rain, and at a distance there was a yellow glow on the edge of the jungle. It was, indeed, the SunDome. The men smiled and looked at each other. "Looks like you were right, Lieutenant." "Brother, that puts muscle in me just seeing it. Come on, last one there's a rotten egg." Simmons yanked the door wide open. "Hey, bring the coffee!" But there was no reply. They stepped through the door. The SunDome was empty and dark. There was no synthetic yellow sun floating in a high gaseous whisper at the center of the blue ceiling. There was no food waiting. It was cold as a vault. Through 1,000 holes in which had been newly punctured in the ceiling, water streamed. The rain fell down, soaking in the thick rugs and the heavy modern furniture and splashing the long glass tables. The jungle was growing up like moss in the room, on top of the bookcases and the divans. The rain splashed through the holes and fell upon the 3 men's faces. The lieutenant frowned, nodded at Simmons so he could see Simmons shook his head, went back to a room at one side of the oval chamber. The kitchen was strewn with soggy loaves of bread, meat that had grown a fair green fur. Rain came through 100 holes in the kitchen roof. "Without food, sir," Simmons snorted. "I noticed the sun machine's been torn apart. Our best bet is to make our way to the next SunDome." "How far is that from here?" "It's not far. As I recall, they built two rather close together here. Perhaps if we waited here, a rescue mission from the other might... It's probably been here and gone already some days ago. They'll send a crew to repair this place in about 6 months. When they get the money. I don't think we'd better wait. Alright, boys. We'll eat what's left of our rations, and then get on to the next dome. Pickard said, "If only the rain would hit my head, just for a few minutes. I can only remember what it's like to not be bothered." He put his hands on his skull and held it tight. I remember when I was in school, the bully used to sit in back of me and pinch me and pinch me and pinch me every few minutes all day long. He did that for weeks and months. My arms were sore and black and blue at the time, and I thought I'd go crazy from being pinched. One day I must have gone a little mad from being hurt, and I turned around and took a metal tri-scare. I used the mechanical drawing, and I almost killed the guy. I almost cut his lousy head off. He clenched his hands to the bones of his head, shaking. But what do I do now? Who do I hit? Who do I tell to lay off? Stop bothering me. This rain, like pinching, always on you. It's all you hear. It's all you feel. We'll be at another SunDome by 4 in the afternoon. SunDome? Look at this one. What if all the SunDomes in Venus are gone? What then? What if there are holes in the ceiling? There's rain coming in. We'll have to take the chance. I'm tired of chancing it. And all I want is a roof and some quiet. And I want to be alone. That's only 8 hours off if you hold on. Let's eat, said Simmons, watching him. They set off down the coast, southward again. At 4 hours, they had cut inland to go around a river that was a mile wide, so swift it was not navigable by boat. They had to walk inland 6 miles to a place where the river boiled over to the earth, suddenly like a mortal wound. In the rain, they walked on solid ground and returned to the sea. I've got to sleep. Haven't slept in 4 weeks. Tried but couldn't. They lay out full, propping their heads up so the water wouldn't come to their mouths. There were things that crawled on his skin. Things grew upon him in layers. Drops fell and touched other drops, and they became streams and trickles over his body. And while these moved down his flesh, the small growths of the forest took root in the clothing. He felt the ivy clinging, making a second garment over him. He felt the small flowers bud and open in the petal way, and still the rain pattered on his body and his head. In the luminous light, the vegetation glowed in the darkness. He could see the other 2 men outlined like logs that had fallen and taken upon themselves velvet coverings of grass flowers. The rain hit his face. He covered his face with story pulled from his hands. The rain hit his neck. He turned over to his stomach in the mud, and on the rubbery plants, and the rain hit his back and his legs. And suddenly he leaped up, began to brush the water from himself. 1,000 hands were touching him, and he no longer wanted to be touched. He no longer could stand being touched. He floundered and struck something else and knew it was Simmons, standing up in the rain, sneezing with moisture, coughing and choking. And then Pickard was up, shouting, running about. "Wait a minute, Pickard! Stop!" He fired off his gun 6 times in the night sky. In the flashes of powdery illumination, they could see armless raindrops, suspended in a vast, motionless amber, for an instant hesitating as if shocked by the explosion. 15 billion droplets, 15 billion tears, 15 billion ornaments, jewels standing the drops, which had waited to have their pictures taken, which had suspended down the downward rush, fell upon them, stinging like an insect cloud of coldness. "Stop it! Pickard!" But Pickard was only standing now, alone. The lieutenant switched on a small hand lamp and played it over Pickard's wet face. The eyes of the man were dilated, and his mouth was open, his face turned up. And so the water hit and splashed on his tongue, and hit and drowned the wide eyes, and bubbled in a whispering froth of the nostrils. "Pickard!" The man would not reply. He simply stood there for a long while with the bubbles of rain breaking out in his whitened hair and minnacles of rain jewels dropping from his wrists and neck. "Pickard, we're leaving. We're going now. You follow us. Do you hear me, Pickard?" It was like shouting down a well. "Leave him alone. We can't go on without him." "What'll we do, carry him? He's no good to us or himself. You know what he'll do. He'll just stand there and drown." "What?" "You ought to know that by now. Don't you know the story?" "He'll just stand here with his head up and let the rain come in his nostrils and his mouth, and he'll breathe the water. That's how they found General Mint that one time, sitting on a rock with his head back, breathing the rain. His lungs were full of water." The lieutenant turned the light back to the unblinking face. Pickard's nostrils gave off a tiny whispering wet sound. "Pickard!" The lieutenant slapped his face. "He can't even feel you. A few days in this rain, you don't have any face or any legs or hands. We can't leave Pickard here. I'll show you what we can do." Simmons fired his gun, and Pickard fell into the raining earth. Simmons said, "Don't move, Lieutenant. I've got a gun ready to go for you too. Think it over. You would have stood or sat there and drowned. It's quicker this way." The lieutenant blinked at the body. "But you killed him." "Yes, because he'd have killed us by being a burden. You saw his face. He was insane." "All right." The lieutenant nodded. They walked off into the rain. It was dark and their hand lamps threw a beam that pierced the rain for only a few feet. And after a half hour they had to stop and sit through the rest of the night, aching with hunger, waiting for the dawn to come. When it did come, it was gray, continually raining as before, and they began to walk again. "We've miscalculated." "No, another hour." "I can't hear you. Speak louder." "By Christ, my ears, they've gone out of me. All the rain pouring finally numbed me right to the bone." "Can't you hear anything?" said the lieutenant. "What?" Simmons' eyes were puzzled. "Nothing. Come on." "I think I'll wait here. You go on ahead." "You can't do that." "I can't hear you. You go on. I'm tired. I don't think the SunDome is down this way, and if it is, it's probably got holes in the roof like the last one. I think I'll just sit here." "Get up from there!" "So long, Lieutenant." "You can't give up now!" "I've got a gun here that says I'm staying. I just don't care anymore. I'm not crazy yet. The next thing to it. I don't want to go out that way. As soon as you get out of sight, I'm going to use this gun on myself." "Simmons?" "You said my name. I can read that much with your lips." "Simmons!" "Look, it's a matter of time. Either I die now or in a few hours. Wait till you get to that next dome. If you ever get there, find rain coming through the roof. Wouldn't that be nice?" The lieutenant waited and splashed out into the rain. "Another 5 minutes. Another 5 minutes, and then I'll walk into the sea, and I'll keep walking." Then he saw, in the rain, printed letters over it. It said, SunDome. He put his sun hand up to feel it. Then he twisted the doorknob and stumbled in. He stood for a moment looking about. Behind him the rain whirled at the door. Ahead of him, upon a low table, stood a silver pot of hot chocolate, steaming, and a cup full with marshmallows in it. Besides that, anything you could ever want, anything you could ever desire. He put his hands to his eyes. He saw other men moving toward him. He said nothing to them. He waited and opened his eyes and looked. The water from his uniform peeled at his feet. He felt it drying from his hair and his face and his chest and his arms and his legs. He was looking at the sun. It hung in the center of the room, large and yellow and warm. It made not a sound. There was no sound in the room. door was shut. The rain only a memory to his tingling body. The sun hung high in the blue sky of the room. Warm, hot, yellow, very fine. He walked forward, tearing off his clothes